Well, good morning again. So, today is going to be a little bit different. Normally, I would put this on the blog and list everything out because it is a written recipe, but I haven't found anybody who can, who wants to build that for me so that it's not ad paid yet, so I haven't been posting to the blog. And this will be a recipe for some barbecue sauce that I have been experimenting with. This is the third version of the barbecue sauce, and I wanted to split it into two different batches and make one with plum and one with cherry to see what difference that actually ends up making. The goal is to try and create a sort of keto-friendly barbecue sauce that is just, a little bit healthier anyway. So it's got a notably reduced level of sugar in the recipe compared to what I would normally put in my older barbecue sauce recipes. And it's a lot heavier on sweet spices and sweet ingredients, so that the sweetness can come from the actual fruits and vegetables instead of from added sugar. And I'm probably going to reduce the sugar in version 4 as well. So the first step was to simply melt the butter, which don't really need a picture of that. But then I thinly sliced the carrots and put them in the butter because they will require the most time sautéing. The next step is for adding the onion, which I have diced pretty finely. I don't bother taking the time in this case, since they're just going to be pulverized and I'm not looking necessarily for uniform appearance. I just julienne the onion and then turn half at a time, and then turn that and then just chop it. And instead of trying to carefully slice horizontally and then slice vertically and then chop. I know that's how theoretically professionals tend to do that, but it's faster for me to just julienne it and chop. I mean, as you can see in the picture, it doesn't. I mean, it's it is what it is. But the goal here is not so much to create the smaller size, or to create, like I said, uniform size. The goal here is to just brown the meat. So, well, I take it back. And not even actually brown it at this point, just to get the meat of the onions to a translucent color, to start soaking that butter through and just get them to a point where they are starting to look nice and ready for the next step, because they'll continue cooking and continue softening. So adding the tomatoes is next, and again, I just chopped them reasonably fine. You could save a little bit of cutting time, if you didn't want to spend the time at the cutting board, and you could leave all of this stuff larger and just let it simmer longer. But since I have to pay for propane to cook, and I don't have to pay for time, then I figured that was the easier route. So then once we've got all of that together, then I added the sugar and the molasses. Let that start to simmer, and that will help break down the veggie meat even further. But using a immersion blender is definitely the fastest way to break all of that down. So at this point, I've got all of the ingredients mixed up, and I've added the spices to this, and I've got one big batch. This is in this particular pot is a 2-gallon stock pot, and so there's about 1.5 gallons of liquid here. So then I'm going to take that and divide it in half, because like I said, I wanted to compare the difference between using cherry, which is a fairly uncommon barbecue sauce ingredient, at least as far as I've ever seen, and compare that to plum, which is also a somewhat less commonly used ingredient, but I prefer both of those flavors over grape and raisin. So now we're going to put half of that barbecue sauce base back in the pot, and then I added the plums, and these are just ripe black plums from over in Yakima. So they're technically local, because Yakima is only like 45 miles, something like that. But I wasn't. In fact, Emily's the one that picked these, but she wasn't looking specifically for anything other than plums. Now, eventually, we do hope to make this again with plums from our property, and right now we have a Stanley plum tree and a Italian prune plum tree. We had a Rosa, but the deer got a little bit too into that one, and it didn't make it. So anyway, once the plums are added, then it's time to again get that all cooked down, and then blend it up, and hit with the immersion blender. And then the exact same recipe was followed for both the plum and the cherry. The only difference is the fruit itself, and I washed everything in between the two batches of cooking it down. I tried to reduce them both by about half, maybe a little less than half, just until they were a nice thick barbecue sauce consistency. I did not blend them again, which I probably could have, to try and get a finer sauce. I figured one of the appeals to me of a barbecue sauce is that I like to have, some presence to the sauce, and the easiest way to do that, in my opinion, was to just leave that a little bit on the thick side, from just a tiny bit of size to the meat. So then comes the next step, which turns out, if you're in the middle of the heat of July, being able to do this outside is amazing. So we washed all of these pints, ended up being 6 of each, so again, about 1.5 gallons. And then we took that out to our little, we have a full-size range that we've converted to run off of propane, and we bought it to actually have a full-size oven, was the original purpose, but the igniter went out, and then the pandemic happened, and supply-demand issues and supply chain issues. It's literally like a little $8 or $10 part, and because of all those issues, it became a $90 part, or like at one point the cheapest I could find it was $112. And I said, yeah, screw it. I don't need it that badly. So for a reasonable price, then I will, get that fixed again and get it replaced. So it is what it is. But the range top doesn't need the igniter, and the range top actually doesn't need power either, so it's pretty great. We just light the burners, and we can still use it to cook on. And since it's a full 36-inch wide range, we can put 2 giant pots on it, which is pretty awesome. The other thing about being out there that's super nice is the fact that we can just sit and lounge. And since I have a pair of thrones to continue to dry and eventually kiln dry, then we can, relax in them. And they really are quite comfortable to sit in. They don't, you don't think they look very comfortable because they're just hardwood, but they are surprisingly comfortable. So we had lunch out here. We just relaxed, brought everything up to a boil, and Emily ended up spending some time just reading and relaxing, and that was what it was. And the other nice thing about being out here is that you get this amazing view to enjoy while you're canning, and the wind just blows the heat away, so we never had to deal with any excessive heat other than just the regular heat of the day. The downside is that I'm pretty sure I did use a little bit of extra fuel simply because the wind was blowing, but we did put a thick canvas tarp over the entrance on the south side, and that made a big difference in how much wind was blowing on the burners. So that made it so that we weren't wasting a ton of fuel trying to heat those, and still had just enough of a breeze to keep things nice and cool. But like I said, we ended up with I lied. I guess it was actually 5 quarts of each, or 5 pints of each. And just for space, I left empty jars in the canner, just so that I've had times where in the past, while it's at a rolling boil, it can push the jars around, and I've had them tip over when there's space. So I always fill the canner when I do that, or when I can, so that there's no space. And on that note, actually, I'm going to put a copy of that picture back up here. So I am not using a regular canner, and the reason for that is simply that it's not deep enough to do 2-quart jars in the black speckled canner that you buy as an actual canner. The only advantage that I have found that particular canner has is that it comes with a basket, and you can raise and lower all of your quarts or pints at the same time. But again, that doesn't fit a 2-quart jar, which I have a lot of because I've done a lot of juices. And apparently barbecue sauce is one that is apparently approved for processing times with a 2-quart jar. But that's a lot of that's a lot of sauce in one jar. So I don't plan on doing that. At least not unless I get some really big batches of plums. But so on the left, I've actually got a pressure canner, and I just don't put the cap or the gauge or even the rubber seal. I just put the lid on loosely so that it can act as just a regular lid. And then on the right, I've just got a 5-gallon stock pot, and I have 2 pressure canner bottoms because I had one pressure canner that we were cooking something in and didn't realize that the liquid had gone out, and it started to actually like superheat the metal, and since it's aluminum and it has a relatively low heating point, which a burner on a stove can reach, it ended up bowing the bottom of the pressure canner, so it's no longer good as a pressure canner. I could theoretically try and heat it back up, flatten it, and then have it tested. Someday I might do that, but I just haven't. So I actually have a spare weight, a spare gauge, a spare ring, and a spare bottom plate to raise it off, and I actually just use that in the 5-gallon stock pot, and it works amazingly. But I've also had times where I needed large canning batches, and so I've got the camp stove out, doing some pressure canning on that, and I'll take a large 10-gallon stock pot for when I do the juices in the 2-quart jars. I'll actually just put some pressure ring or some canning rings in the bottom of that, and that way it keeps them off the bottom of the pot, so that you don't have to worry about the heat building up too much in the bottom of the jar, which is the reason you keep them off the jar. I've even heard of people using towels, and I've done that a couple of times. I still put some rings in there just because I'm paranoid that the towel isn't going to dissipate the heat well enough and keep the fluid flowing around the jar well enough. But I've heard of people doing that. So anyway, that'll be it for the recipe today, or for the video today. So it'll be a little bit on the short side, but because I know a lot of people complain that the recipe is not readily available, I'll put that at a few different points. Maybe even leave it up during the entire video. I don't know. We'll see how I feel as I actually do the finish editing for this. But that'll be where we end it for today. So as always, thank you for watching. God bless you and yours, and I hope you stay safe and healthy out there. Oh, and I guess I should actually mention, we tested this, and we've had several people on 5 different occasions test it so far. And the consensus from people who are not on keto has been that this recipe actually is still fairly sweet and pretty delicious. So, like I said, the next version we might actually reduce the sugar even further. But anyway, so yeah, that's what it is. That's where we're at. And we'll catch you on the next video.